Turns out Iran has damaged quite a few of our bases and our military assets, and that's according to a new report from NBC News. Cenk, this is not surprising. This is something that has been reported by a lot of independent sources, but NBC News apparently has realized that Iran also has military capability and can do some real damage.
Yeah, there's two parts of the story that I find interesting. One is the extent of the damage that they did, including some things that were unprecedented in recent years, which maybe you're tracking it better than I am, Anna, but I was surprised by the level of damage that they had done, which we'll share with you guys in a second. And then secondarily, I was surprised by how much of Iran's military still exists. I halfway bought into the hype about how they were all destroyed. It turns out that's not remotely true. So let's give you the facts.
So NBC cited several sources for their reporting here, including 3 anonymous US officials, 2 anonymous GOP congressional aides, and 1 anonymous person familiar with the damage. All you need to do is pay attention to former military generals who were rejected by the Trump administration for his new administration in the second term, and you'll know the extent of the damage. You don't need to rely on anonymous sources. Nonetheless, the sources claim that the destruction caused by Iran spans across several countries in the Middle East and could cost up to $5 billion to repair. And that's actually a pretty conservative estimate, to be quite frank. More on that in just a bit. According to the sources, Iranian forces managed to strike runways, high-end radar systems. In fact, the radar systems is what they went for first, which was incredibly strategic. Clearly, they had a plan in mind. They knew that the United States was going to attack them, and they knew what they were going to do in response. Dozens of aircraft, warehouses, command headquarters, aircraft hangars, and satellite communications infrastructure. So Iran even managed to bypass American air defenses. So early in the war, an Iranian F-5 fighter jet bombed the US base Camp Buring in Kuwait, despite the base having air defenses, a rare breach that marked the first time an enemy fixed-wing aircraft has struck an American military base in years. So since Iran does not have the capability to strike the United States, their plan, once the US struck them and started this war, was to strike US bases in the Gulf region, and that's exactly what they did. Now, these Gulf countries were under the impression that if they host US military bases, that means that it's going to bolster their security. Oops, well, that didn't happen. In fact, at the very start of the war, Trump said, and he literally said this out loud, that he was surprised that Iran struck US military bases. Could it be because Iran showed a great deal of restraint following previous US attacks on their country? Probably. But you play stupid games, you win stupid prizes. And so now the real question is whether or not these Gulf countries would even be willing to host US military bases should the US government decide to rebuild those bases. But let me continue with more of the damage. So the $5 billion price tag that I had referenced earlier does not include the cost of fixing some equipment like the radar and aircraft that was destroyed, which is gonna cost a lot of money. So Iran hit US bases in at least 7 different countries: Bahrain, Iraq, Jordan, Kuwait, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and the UAE. The report claims that detailed information is being withheld from members of Congress, which should be unsurprising. One of the anonymous congressional aides even said that no one knows anything, and it's not for lack of asking. We have been asking for weeks and not getting specifics, even as the Pentagon is asking for a record high budget. If you guys can remember, Donald Trump has requested a defense budget of $1.5 trillion, which is insane, which is absolutely insane. But the administration has even requested that private satellite companies refrain from imaging the US bases that have been destroyed. And that was confirmed by a satellite company called Planet Labs. Now, a Pentagon official also stated the following: "We do not discuss battle damage assessments for operation security reasons. Our forces remain fully operational, and we continue to execute our mission with the same readiness and combat effectiveness." Well, if what we've seen with Iran so far has been the Pentagon's idea of readiness and combat effectiveness, I really don't know what to say. We're in a lot of trouble. And by the way, the fact that we've depleted 80% of our missile interceptors when we're making enemies all across the globe in order to make our little friend Israel happy should be concerning for anyone who has any fear for our national security. NBC's report also acknowledged that Iran's counterattack could hurt the narrative for the foreign policy hawks that can get effed as far as I'm concerned. The issue could embolden critics of America's military presence overseas who have advocated for shrinking the US presence in the Middle East. One US official and one person familiar with that matter said, well, I mean, I certainly would be in the camp of, if I weren't an American and I were in a country hosting a military base that was getting attacked, yeah, I would be in the camp of maybe we shouldn't host US military bases on our land, but who knows?
No, that's obvious.
Yeah.
They thought that it was going to protect them, and what it did was it endangered them. And so now Saudi Arabia and UAE are looking around, maybe thinking about doing it. Saudi Arabia, not UAE in this particular case, thinking about doing a deal with BRICS instead of us for security, because they're like, all that Israel and America has brought us is pain and trouble and bombings. So we're now less safe because we were stupid enough to make a deal with the Israelis and Americans, basically. So now let's break this down further. By the way, this was said by one of our members a couple of weeks ago, and it's really stuck with me. It was Israeli and Trump racism that actually cost us dearly. Because the Israelis came in and told Trump, oh, these dumb Iranians, they won't even be able to figure out how to close the Strait of Hormuz. Remember, these are savage Muslim terrorists. They don't know anything. Oh, bombing our bases, your bases in the Gulf? They won't be able to do that at all. Remember, they're barbarian, savage cavemen, right? Oops, oops. Look, one of the biggest problems with political media right now isn't just bias. It's how quickly the same story gets spun into two completely different realities depending on who's telling it. That's why I recommend Ground News. It's a website and app that pulls together reporting from across the political spectrum so you can compare how the same story is being covered, who's covering it, and what kind of narrative they're pushing. Now take this story about Pete Hegseth refusing to rule out US troops on the ground in Iran. On Ground News, you can immediately see how differently outlets frame that same development. The Daily Signal downplays the danger by stressing that this isn't Iraq and that the war won't be endless. Meanwhile, NBC focuses on the important part, that Hegseth would not rule out American boots on the ground in Iran. Same story, two completely different realities. And Ground News makes that obvious right away. You can compare headlines side by side, see the biased distribution of the coverage, check the factuality ratings of the sources, and even see who owns the outlets behind the reporting. That matters because once you understand how stories are being framed, you start to see how public consent gets manufactured. Ground News also has a blind spot feed that highlights stories that one side of the political spectrum is barely covering. So you're not just trapped inside the version of the world your algorithm wants to feed you. If you're tired of being fed somebody else's narrative, I genuinely recommend Ground News. Go to ground.news/TYT or scan the QR code. Using our link gets you 40% off the Ground News Vantage plan. And you could also gift a subscription directly through Ground News. So I don't know if you know this, but the Persian culture has been around 200 times longer than America has. That's a lot, okay? So, no, sorry, 20. 250 years to 5,000 years. But no, they know things. They're not, oh, me, ooga booga, like the Israelis want you to believe. And so it turns out, not only have they done massive damage, let me just add on to what Anna said. Yeah, the 5 billion number is a joke because it doesn't include all the radar. We lost apparently dozens of planes. Dozens of planes. What happened to we have total control over their airspace? No, apparently we don't because our planes keep getting shot down. Okay, apparently 3/4 of Iran's air force still exists. So the whole thing of like, they don't have an air force anymore, not true.
No, they've totally been obliterated.
Yeah, F-5 jet of Iran, as Anna told you, gets past our security and bombs a US base. First time that's happened in years and years and years, right? So apparently their pilots are pretty good and their Air Force still exists. The fast boats are obliterating us in the Strait of Hormuz. They still have plenty of fast boats. And so they don't need to beat an aircraft carrier. They just need the fast boats to plant the mines and leave. So they apparently have an endless source of those. And then on top of all of that, the missiles, we destroyed almost all their ballistic missiles and stuff. No, they have thousands of missiles and drones left. So they have plenty of ammunition left. They don't have the giant ships and planes we have, but they don't need them. But Trump, being like the lowest IQ leader that any country has ever had, was like, our button is bigger than theirs. Our ships are bigger than theirs. Yeah, but brother, Goliath was bigger than David, but the slingshot made a bit of a difference, right? So you've got to calculate, hey, I wonder what that slingshot can do. But apparently everyone in our government is a bunch of morons who are like, it'll be easy against the stupid Muslim savages. Oh no! Well, what happened? What happened, you idiots? Now the entire world economy is in danger, let alone all the people who have been killed by this totally needless war, right?
Exactly.
So when you look at all this, where we stand now, guys, is not only did the war cost $2 billion a day in the beginning when we're firing off all the rockets, now it's down to $1 billion a day. They're asking for $400 billion extra to fight this war, even though they told us it would be easy and cheap. And then on top of that, there's the economic damage that's coming from all the gas prices and food prices and inflation that's coming. So we're supposed to pay all of this. And Israel says, not enough. Go back into the war and put your stupid ground troops in so they could die instead of Israelis. And we're not done stealing Lebanon, and we're not done trying to create a civil war in Iran so millions of people can die. America's back to work, back to the war, Israel says. And that's where we are today. We're now apparently beholden to our overlords in Israel who demand compliance and that we pay every price there is. So we've lost men, we've lost aircraft, we've lost a significant amount in our military, and finally, 80% of our defensive missiles have already been used up. And Israel says, we don't care, send your ships into the Gulf. And you know why? Because if Iran sinks one of our ships, we're gonna be super angry and we're gonna stay in the war longer. So Israel's like, please, I wonder, Anna, now this is getting over the top. But a lot of people are worried about false flags and
like a USS Liberty type situation.
Oh, how dare you mention facts? Yeah, I don't know what could happen, but I'll tell you what, if somebody hits one of our ships, we should ask a million questions about how that happened, okay?
Yeah, we won't, but it's okay.
Yes, but our
It's not
press will
okay,
of course
but
say, oh no, anyone asking questions of the government is an anti-Semite, and we should all bow our heads. Back to the mines, Americans. You haven't done enough war for Israel yet, right? So that's where we are now, and we're all totally and utterly screwed. This damage, if the war continues, this damage will later be seen as the tip of the iceberg. And the iceberg is going to be a disaster of epic proportions. Every time you ring the bell below, an angel gets his wings. Totally not true, but it does keep you updated on our live shows.